Nickelodeon spent 10 seasons telling kids a story about magic fairy godparents. Two fairies show up. They grant wishes. Everything works out. But if you watch the show with the lens of clinical psychology, every episode, every rule, every character, it is not about magic. It is about a medicated child trying to survive an abusive home. And almost none of you realize the evidence was there from episode 1. Today, we're going through every piece. Let's move. Timmy Turner is a 10-year-old boy living in Dimsdale with two parents who are, by every measurable standard, neglectful. Not mildly inattentive. Neglectful. They leave him alone with a babysitter who is documented as physically and psychologically abusive. They do not believe him when he reports the abuse. They forget his birthday. They forgot his name in several episodes. They prioritize their own lives, their jobs, their vacations, over their son's basic safety. This is not a comedic exaggeration. This is a child welfare case. In any real-world scenario, Timmy Turner would be removed from that home. What most people do not realize is that the show's own lore confirms this. Fairy godparents are not assigned to lucky children. They're assigned to miserable children. That is the criteria. You have to be miserable enough to qualify. The Fairy Council, which functions as a kind of regulatory body and we'll come back to that, evaluates the child's suffering and assigns fairies as intervention. This is not a magic system. This is a treatment protocol. Cosmo and Wanda appear at Timmy's lowest point, the moment Vicky's abuse becomes unbearable. That is consistent with the onset of a coping mechanism. And here is where it gets interesting. Cosmo and Wanda have distinct personalities. They are not interchangeable. They serve different functions. Cosmo is silly, chaotic, distracting. He represents emotional regulation, anxiety relief. When Timmy is scared or overwhelmed, Cosmo provides dopamine. Wanda is practical, cautious, analytical. She represents reality testing. She checks the wishes. She evaluates consequences. She is the superego to Cosmo's id. Things get even crazier when you look at how the wishes actually work. Timmy makes a wish. The wish goes wrong. The fairies fix it. This is the exact pattern of a child learning to self-regulate through imagined companions. The wish is the emotional impulse. The consequence is the anxiety spike. The fix is the coping mechanism bringing the child back to baseline. And the fairies cannot solve Timmy's core problem. They cannot remove Vicky. They cannot make his parents care. The rules explicitly forbids it. Therapy does not fix the environment. It helps you cope with it. Someone sat in a writer's room and made that decision professionally. Vicky is the inciting incident. She is the reason Timmy is miserable enough to receive fairies. In the show's own framework, without Vicky, there is no intervention. Without Vicky, there is no treatment. But here is the part that confirms the theory. Timmy never wishes Vicky away permanently. The rules allow temporary changes. They allow wish-based alterations. But the core suffering, Vicky, remains across all 10 seasons. In Channel Chasers, we see a future timeline where adult Timmy no longer has fairies, but Vicky's influence still shaped his life. She became a dictator in an alternate future. The trauma didn't disappear when the treatment ended, it metastasized. What most people do not realize is that the show's writers built this arc deliberately. Timmy needs Vicky to qualify for his godparents. That is stated on record in Channel Chasers. The abuse is the precondition for the treatment. Remove the abuse and the treatment has no justification. That is not a cartoon premise. That is a pharmacological dependency model. If you read the rules as a medication protocol, every rule maps to a real clinical framework. Rule: fairies cannot reveal themselves to non-godchildren. That is patient confidentiality. The treatment is private. The therapist exists only in the session. Rule: fairies cannot interfere with love. That is a treatment boundary. You cannot medicate someone into a relationship. The therapist cannot create social outcomes. They can only help the patient manage their own behavior. Rule: fairies cannot bring the dead back to life. That is scope limitation. Therapy has limits. It cannot reverse irreversible loss. It can only help the patient process it. Rule: wishes must be vocalized. That is verbalization, a core requirement of cognitive behavioral therapy. The patient must articulate the need before the intervention can begin. I'm not gonna lie, when you list them out like this, the parallel is almost too clean, but the evidence is in the show's own writing. These rules are not arbitrary magical limitations. They are structured constraints around what the treatment can and cannot do. They function identically to clinical treatment protocols. And there is one rule that seals it. When a child grows up, they lose their fairies. That is the rule. That is the one immutable law of the Fairy Godparent program. In clinical terms, that is aging out of pediatric psychiatric care. Children's mental health services have age cutoffs. At a certain point, the patient transitions to adult care or they discontinue treatment entirely. The show literalizes this. Timmy ages, the fairies disappear, the treatment ends. The entire emotional climax of the movie, Grow Up Timmy Turner, is about this decision. Does Timmy stay a child forever to keep his fairies? Or does he grow up, face reality without them, and learn to function unmedicated? That is the literal question every patient faces when considering whether to discontinue treatment. Things get even crazier when you realize the movie frames it as a choice. Timmy chooses to grow up. He chooses to lose the fairies. The show presents this as bravery. Growing up without your coping mechanism is framed as the heroic act. This is the exact narrative around discontinuing therapy. It is scary. It is necessary. It is framed as a milestone. Now the obvious objection. Other characters interact with the fairies sometimes. Crocker sees them, Remy has his own fairy, Jorgen von Strangle manages the whole program. If the fairies are hallucinations, how do other people see them? Here's the rebuttal. Crocker is canonically delusional. The show confirms this repeatedly. He is not evidence of objective reality. He is evidence of shared pathology. Remy is another traumatized child with his own fairy. He is another patient in the program. And Jorgen? Jorgen is the medical establishment. He administers the program. He enforces the rules. He does not treat patients. He manages the system. The counter-evidence makes the case stronger, not weaker. Every character who interacts with the fairies is either another patient, a system administrator, or canonically delusional. Not one neutral, healthy observer confirms the fairies' independent reality. That's the record. The verdict. Every rule maps to a clinical protocol. Every character maps to a therapeutic function. The core conflict, an abused child receiving intervention that cannot fix the source of the abuse, only help him cope, is a pharmacological framework. The growing up rule is treatment termination. The rules is a medication protocol. The fairies are therapeutic constructs. That is not a cartoon about magic. That is a case study. Someone wrote this, it was storyboarded, it was animated, and across 10 seasons, the internal logic never broke. That is not an accident. That is a framework. Do you think the writers knew what they were building? Or did the psychology just emerge? Let me know in the comments. Hit subscribe.